Okay, welcome back. I'm just having a quick break myself. You can see I've finished the front frame. This is built in exactly the same way as the rear one, although the layout is slightly different. Obviously we've got no central divider, and the uprights here I've used 45 by 45 material rather than 45 by 32 because I want this area to be really strong, because this is where we're going to hang the big doors from in the finished shed. So strength and rigidity is the key for any project that you're making for outside if you want it to last for any length of time. Right, I'm going to finish my T and then we'll get on making the two side frames. They're going to be very much easier. We'll see in a minute. These are just screwed together in the same way with a single intermediate divider. And like all the other joints, 2 screws in each stops the wood twisting. Do check the joints for squareness as you go along. If these ends have been cut square, it should be spot on anyway, but sometimes a little bit of a bend on the timber and these little errors can start to accumulate, and before you know it the whole thing's way off square. So just check it and correct it if need be as you go along. With 2 identical components like this, use the first one as a template, assemble the second one on top of it, and then you don't have to mark or measure anything, and they're bound to end up absolutely identical. Right, that's the second of the side frames completed, so all the frames are now finished. It's not very airtight at the moment, so the next job is to get the cladding onto it, and as usual start by cutting the longest pieces you need. So for that I'm going to start on the back frame that we made first, cut the longest pieces for that, then I can cut all these short pieces out of the offcuts that are left over. This is the material I'm going to use for the cladding. Standard shiplap material with a groove and a tongue so the pieces interlock. Just check it over carefully when you buy it. This stuff tends to be very knotty, and if you get a lot of big old dead knots they can drop out, as you can see here, and you then end up with a hole in the side of your shed, which is really not ideal. So when you order it, get a little bit extra, that'll allow you to work around these defects. We've got to decide how we're going to cut all these pieces. There's a lot of pieces to be cut to cover the 4 sides. You could mark and cut each one individually, but that's going to be very long, involved and very tedious, and unless you're very good you don't end up with a perfect edge down here. Well, I don't anyway. Maybe that doesn't matter, maybe you're not bothered, it is only a shed after all. But if you want a really perfect finish, there's a very quick and easy way of doing this. I'll show you. This will only work though if you've got a router, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a batch of pieces all slightly over length, a couple of mil at either end, pin them in place on the frame and then run round them with a router and trim them back to exactly match the frame. It's much quicker and gives you a perfect edge every time. So here we go, 6 pieces at a time, marked out to be slightly over length, and chop them through as one. Okay, so that's the first batch cut, ready for nailing on. You see, just 2 or 3 millimeters over length. I don't have to be fussy lining up down here. It's going to be a much quicker job fixing them in place. When you fix the bottom one on all the frames, let it overhang by about, again, 3 millimeters at the bottom here, and then any water that runs down the side of the shed will come down the side here and drip clear the frame. If you put them flush, there's a tendency for the water to run down and then run underneath, and it will rot the bottom of the frame. Again, 2 or 3 millimeters overhanging at the bottom and the water will drip clear. I'm using a nail gun to pin the boards in place. If you do a lot of this sort of work, it really is worth investing in something like this. It'll save you hours and hours of time. When you put the nails in, just put 1 nail in the bottom of each board, just here, because this will hold the top of the board below as well. But at the same time, it'll still give the timber freedom to move. When it warms up in the summer, hopefully, the timber will try and shrink. If you put too many nails in, it can't shrink and it will crack. Just 1 nail at the bottom here will hold the top of the board below, and the timber can still move. Pull them down tight to make sure the joint's fully closed. As you get nearer the apex, you can start using up some of the shorter pieces of cladding, and just mark these underneath and then trim them roughly to size of the jigsaw. Again, it doesn't matter being very accurate, we're going to trim it all later. So with all the cladding in place, now you can use your router with a bearing guided trimmer to run around the outside and cut back all this excess overhang. Remember, when you're working on the outside of a frame, always work anti-clockwise. You can now see what a really neat finish that leaves, and it'll butt up perfectly to the legs. Right, I've left this front frame until last because it allows me to use up lots of these little offcuts of cladding. This is the sort of amount of waste I've got on the end of each board, so it really is very, very economical. I've pinned the bottom piece of cladding on here, you can see, and I've just roughly jigsawed out the opening. I've left lots of meat in the corner here. You'll see in a minute when I run that around with the router, it'll leave a lovely clean radius in each corner. So it's just a question now of carrying on nailing all these pieces of cladding in place. Make sure they're all tucked up tight and nail away. Okay, I've just routed round the outer edge of this front section. Now I've got to go round the door opening. Remember when I talked about doing the outer edge, I say you always work anti-clockwise. On an internal shape like this, you always work clockwise. Then you're working against the rotation of the cutter, which is much, much safer. So let's give this a go. Hopefully now you can see what I meant about leaving the extra waste in this corner when you're cutting it out with a jigsaw. Now I've trimmed it around with a router, it's left a lovely neat radius in there. You'd never get anything as tidy as that doing it by hand. Right, that's the end of the routing, thankfully. Bit of a messy job as you can see, but it does give you a really neat clean finish on these frames. I'm going to get myself cleaned up a little bit, tidy up the workshop, come back in part 3, we'll start putting it all together and make the doors.